The blade came up from under the silver tray, and the man in the waiter's uniform smiled as he raised it toward the throat of a 19-year-old girl who had done nothing to anyone in her life. He had rehearsed this moment for weeks. He wanted her brother to watch her die. He wanted the most powerful man in the city to feel for once completely helpless. And in that first frozen second, as the whole restaurant held its breath, it looked like he was going to get exactly what he came for. Before we go any further, if this story moves you, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me until the very end, because the twist in this one will stay with you. And do me a favor, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from right now so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Nobody in that restaurant would ever agree on what happened next. Some swore it took 10 seconds. Others said it was over in 2. But every single person who was there that night remembered one thing with perfect clarity. They remembered the woman in the worn-out shoes, the one nobody had looked at twice all evening, the one who was supposed to be invisible. Her name was Claire Bennett, and she was 26 years old, and she was so tired that her hands had been shaking since her shift began. She had taken an extra shift she couldn't afford to refuse on legs that had already worked a full day in a body that was running on coffee and fear. She had a little brother at home named Noah, and Noah was sick, and everything Claire did, every single hour she stood on that marble floor, smiling at people who never smiled back, she did for him. She hadn't wanted to be at table 9 that night. She hadn't wanted to be anywhere near the man everyone whispered about. But that's where the manager had put her, and Claire had learned long ago that a woman like her didn't get to choose where she stood. The man everyone whispered about was named Adrian Voss. You didn't say his name too loud in that city. You said it the way you'd talk about weather that could kill you. Some people called him a businessman. Some called him a billionaire. And some people, the ones who knew things, called him something else entirely, and they only said it behind locked doors with the lights turned low. Adrian Voss controlled things. People, money, fear. He walked into rooms and the temperature dropped. He had built an empire out of loyalty and silence, and the price of crossing him was a price nobody wanted to pay twice. But that night, Adrian Voss had done something no one who knew him would have believed. He had taken his little sister out to dinner, just the two of them, no wall of bodyguards blocking the door, no men in dark suits pretending to read menus. No business, no meetings, no threats folded into quiet conversations. Just Adrian and a 19-year-old girl named Lily, who was the only person on this earth he had ever loved without conditions, without suspicion, without waiting for the betrayal he always assumed was coming. You didn't have to do all this, Lily had said when they sat down, running her fingers over the white tablecloth like she was afraid she might damage it. It's your birthday, Adrian said. You remembered. I remember everything about you. He'd looked at her, then really looked at her, and for one moment, the hardness in his face had softened into something almost human. You're the only good thing I ever did, Lily. She'd laughed embarrassed and told him to stop being dramatic, and Adrian had let himself smile. For 1 hour in one restaurant, the most feared man in the city had allowed himself to feel like an ordinary older brother taking his sister out for cake. He would spend the rest of his life haunted by how close he came to losing her while his guard was down, because he wasn't the only one watching Lily that night. At the edge of the room near the kitchen doors, a man in a waiter's uniform stood too still. His name, though nobody in that restaurant knew it yet, was Marcus Reed, and Marcus had not come to serve anyone. Claire noticed him before she noticed anything else, and she couldn't have told you why. It was a feeling. The kind of feeling a woman develops when she spent her whole life reading danger before it arrives, because reading it late meant getting hurt. Claire had that instinct sharpened down to the bone. She'd learned it in foster homes in bad neighborhoods in the years after her parents died, when she was still a teenager and suddenly responsible for a baby brother the world had already decided didn't matter. So when she looked at the man near the kitchen doors, something inside her went cold. He was holding a tray, but he was holding it wrong. He held it like a man who had never carried one in his life, like a costume he'd put on that morning. And his eyes never once looked at a customer, never checked a water glass, never scanned for a raised hand. His eyes were locked on one table and one table only. Table 9. Claire followed his gaze and found the young woman laughing beside the man in the dark suit, and her stomach dropped. She didn't know who they were, She didn't know that the man was Adrian Voss. She didn't know his reputation, his enemies, his empire, or the invisible line of blood that connected half the tragedies in that city back to his name. She knew none of it, and it wouldn't have changed a thing if she had. All Claire knew was that a man was watching a young woman the way a wolf watches something wounded. She set down her tray. She walked fast across the floor to the one person who was supposed to keep everyone in that room safe. Her manager. His name was Victor Hale, and Victor Hale hated her. He hated her because she needed the job, and he was the kind of man who found something to despise in anyone he had power over. He'd humiliated her 100 times. Earlier that very evening, when she'd spilled 3 drops of water on a tablecloth, he'd stopped her in front of a full section of customers. "You think people come here to watch someone like you make mistakes?" he'd said loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, watching her face burn. And Claire had lowered her head. Not because she thought she was wrong, but because she had a brother at home whose medicine cost more than she made in a week, and a woman with a sick child doesn't get to have pride. She'd learned that fighting back could cost her everything, so she knew exactly what it would cost her to go to Victor now. And she went anyway. "Victor," she kept her voice low, urgent. "There's a man by the kitchen, in a uniform. I don't recognize him. He's watching table 9 and he hasn't served anyone all night." Victor didn't even look up from the reservation book. "You're a waitress," he said. "You're not security. Do your job." "Please, just look at him. Something's wrong. I know it's wrong." Now he looked up and his eyes were flat and mean. "You know what's wrong, you. You imagine problems because you like the drama. Get back to your section." "Victor, I'm telling you. One more word," he said quietly, "and you're fired. Tonight. And good luck finding another place that'll take a girl who can't stop shaking long enough to carry water." The words hit exactly where he wanted them to. Fired tonight. No paycheck Friday. No money for the pharmacy. Noah's next appointment. The whole fragile house of cards she'd been holding up with her bare hands for years, ready to collapse over one sentence from a man who enjoyed watching her squirm. And here is the thing about Claire Bennett that Victor never understood, and that Adrian Voss was about to learn. She should have walked away. Every logical part of her screamed at her to walk away. She had a brother who needed her alive, employed, and out of trouble. She had nothing to gain and a whole life to lose. The smart thing, the safe thing, the thing that any reasonable person would have done, was to lower her head one more time and go back to filling water glasses and let the powerful people handle their own powerful problems. She thought about walking away. For one full second she thought about it. And then she thought about Noah. She thought about all the nights she'd sat by his bed, listening to his heart do things a child's heart shouldn't do, praying to a God she wasn't sure was listening. She thought about what it felt like to be small and sick and afraid, and to need someone, anyone, to notice. She thought about how many times in her own life she had needed someone to step in, and how the room had always stayed silent, and how she'd promised herself back when she was still a frightened girl that if she ever saw someone about to be hurt, she would not be the room. She would not be silent. Some promises you make when you're young, you forget. Claire had never forgotten this one. She turned away from Victor and started walking back toward table 9. Not fast enough to cause panic, just fast enough. She was going to get between that man and that girl, and she was going to do it herself because no one else was going to. She was 3 tables away when it happened. The man dropped his tray. The silver hit the floor with a crash that turned every head in the restaurant, and in the half-second of confusion that followed, Marcus Reed reached beneath his jacket and pulled out something that caught the light. Later people would argue about whether it was a knife or something worse. It didn't matter. What mattered was the way it moved through the air toward Lily Voss, who had just turned toward the noise with a birthday smile still on her face, a smile that had no idea it was about to be the last expression she ever made. Adrian saw it. He was already moving, already reaching, already roaring his sister's name in a voice that came out of some primal place beneath all his cold control. But he was on the wrong side of the table. He was too far. For the first time in his adult life, Adrian Voss, who had never once been too slow for anything, understood in a single stretched-out instant that he was going to watch the only person he loved die 2 feet away from him, and there was nothing his money, or his power, or his empire could do to stop it. The bodyguards weren't there. He'd sent them away because it was her birthday. The whole restaurant recoiled backward as one animal, one gasp, one wave of people throwing themselves away from the danger. Chairs scraped. Someone screamed. The instinct that lives in every human being, get away, survive. Not me, swept through that room like a wind, and it moved everyone. Everyone except one. While 100 people ran backward, one woman in worn-out shoes ran forward. Claire didn't decide to do it. There wasn't time to decide anything. Her body simply chose the way it had chosen 1,000 times before, when Noah stopped breathing in the night, and she was on her feet before she was even awake. She crossed the last 10 feet in a sprint that came from nowhere, from every ounce of strength she had left after a double shift and years of exhaustion, and she reached Lily half a heartbeat before the blade did. She grabbed the girl by the shoulders, and she threw her clear out of the path, down and away, using her own body as the wall between a stranger and the thing coming for her. And then Claire took the hit. The sound of it silenced the entire room. It was a wet, terrible sound, and everyone who heard it flinched, and Adrian Voss, still frozen with his sister's name dying in his throat, watched a woman he had never spoken to fall to the floor in the space where Lily had been standing. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Claire was on the cold marble. She was hurt badly. She could feel it, that strange, distant heat that told her the pain hadn't arrived yet, but was coming. And even now, even lying there, some part of her brain that never stopped taking care of people ran the same math it always ran. Noah. Who's going to take care of Noah? But that thought came second, because the first thing she did before she thought about herself, before she let herself feel any of it, was reach out and pull Lily close. The girl was shaking violently, curled where Claire had thrown her. Her birthday dress twisted her eyes, enormous and wet and uncomprehending. And Claire, this stranger, this waitress, this woman who had every reason in the world to be thinking only about her own body bleeding onto the floor, gathered the terrified girl against her and held her the way she held Noah on his worst nights. "Hey," Claire whispered. Her voice was thin, but it was steady. "Hey, look at me. Don't be afraid." Lily couldn't speak. She just stared. "Don't be afraid," Claire said again, softer. "I'm here. I've got you. I'm right here." 4 words from a stranger to a girl she'd known for 1 hour of table service. And those 4 words would go on to change more lives than Claire Bennett could ever have imagined, though she'd have laughed at you if you'd told her so, because in that moment, she wasn't trying to change anything. She was just doing the only thing she knew how to do. She was protecting somebody who needed it. Then the room exploded back into motion. Adrian's security director, a sharp-eyed woman named Maya Torres, who had been circling the block outside because Adrian had insisted on privacy, came through the doors like a storm. In 3 seconds, she had Marcus Reed on the ground with his arm pinned behind him, and the weapon skittered away across the marble, and the threat was over as fast as it had begun. But Adrian didn't look at the attacker. He didn't look at Maya, or the weapon, or the chaos, or the crowd of people slowly realizing they had just survived something. Adrian Voss looked at the floor. He looked at his sister, alive, whole, shaking, but breathing, wrapped in the arms of a woman he had never bothered to notice all night. A woman in a cheap uniform and shoes that had holes in the soles. A woman who was bleeding for a girl she couldn't possibly have known was worth anything to anyone, because Claire hadn't done it for that reason. She hadn't done it because Lily was rich or important or connected to a dangerous man who could reward her. She'd done it because Lily was frightened and young and about to be hurt, and that was the only reason Claire had ever needed for anything. And Adrian Voss, who had knelt for no one in 20 years, who had made grown men kneel and never once returned. The gesture dropped down onto both knees on the marble beside a dying waitress. "Lily," he said. His voice broke on the word. "Lily, are you? I'm okay." Lily was sobbing now, the shock cracking open. "Adrian, I'm okay. She pushed me. She got in front of it. Adrian looked at the woman holding his sister. Their eyes met for the first time. Claire was fading. He could see it. He'd seen enough of it in his life to know exactly what it looked like. But even so, even now she was still murmuring into Lily's hair, still saying it over and over like a prayer she couldn't stop. "You're okay. You're safe. Don't be afraid. I've got you." "Why?" Adrian said. It came out of him without permission, the most powerful man in the city kneeling on a floor, asking a stranger a question like a lost child. "Why would you do that? You don't even know who we are." Claire's eyes found his, and through the pain, through the gray creeping in at the edges of her vision, she gave him a look he would never forget as long as he lived. Not fear, not the calculation he saw in everyone, not the desperate hope that this rich man might now owe her something. Just confusion, like she didn't understand the question. "She needed help," Claire whispered, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, as if that were an entire answer, as if that were the only answer there had ever been. And then her eyes closed. "No," Adrian said. "No, hey, stay with me, look at me." He grabbed her hand, this man who never touched anyone, and he held it hard. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to save her and then leave. Do you hear me? Maya, get her to the car. Now we're not waiting for an ambulance, get the doctor on the phone. I don't care what it costs. Adrian?" Maya was already moving, already lifting, already giving orders into her phone. "We've got her. She's breathing. Stay with the girl." But Adrian couldn't let go of Claire's hand. He looked down at it. It was rough, this hand. Calloused, chapped from dish soap and hot water and years of work. There was a burn scar along one finger. The nails were bitten short. It was the hand of someone who had never had a single easy day, and it had just thrown itself in front of death for a girl it didn't know, and Adrian Voss, who had touched money his whole life, and never once felt this held that worn-out hand like it was the most valuable thing he had ever been permitted to hold. As Maya's people lifted Claire and carried her toward the doors, something fell from the pocket of her apron and drifted to the floor. Adrian picked it up. It was a photograph. Bent at the corners, soft from being handled 1,000 times. A little boy, maybe 7 or 8, grinning at the camera with a gap in his teeth, holding a beat-up stuffed animal that had clearly been loved almost to pieces. On the back in tired handwriting, 3 words, "Noah, my whole heart." Adrian stared at the photograph for a long time. He didn't know who the boy was. He didn't know that the child in the picture had a heart condition that was slowly killing him. He didn't know that the woman who had just bled for his sister had a little brother of her own that she loved exactly the way Adrian loved Lily, and that every dollar she'd ever earned, every double shift, every humiliation she'd swallowed from a man like Victor Hale, all of it had been for that one gap-toothed smile. He didn't know any of it yet, but he knew what he was looking at. He was looking at the reason. And Lily, still shaking beside him, still not able to fully stand, looked up at her brother with tears streaking her face and said the thing that would haunt him. "She took the blame earlier too," Lily whispered. "When I knocked over my drink, before all this, the manager was going to yell and she stepped in and said it was her fault. A stranger. Why would a stranger do that, Adrian? Why would anyone do that for me?" Adrian didn't have an answer. For the first time in his life, he had no answer at all. Because Adrian Voss had built his entire understanding of the world on one belief, one rule that had never failed him: everything had a price. Every person could be bought, and every kindness was a transaction in disguise, and anyone who smiled at you was calculating what they could take. He'd seen it proven 1,000 times. He'd built an empire on that truth. He'd made himself untouchable by never, not once, believing that a good deed could be exactly what it looked like. And now a woman with nothing. A woman who could have used a favor from a man like him more than almost anyone alive had thrown her body in front of a blade for a stranger and then refused to even understand why he was asking her why. She needed help. 3 words. And they cracked something in him that 20 years of enemies and threats and violence had never been able to touch. He turned still on his knees and looked at the man Maya had pinned to the ground. The fake waiter. The attacker. Marcus Reed. Though Adrian didn't yet know his name or his reasons or the terrible history that connected them. In any other moment, Adrian's rage would have been a living thing. He would have wanted this man to suffer. He would have made him suffer quietly, the way his world handled these things, and no one would have ever asked a question. But he found Kneelings there with a stranger's blood on his hands and a photograph of a little boy in his pocket that he couldn't summon it the way he used to. The rage was there, but underneath it for the first time was something else, something that felt almost like shame. Because Adrian understood dimly in a way he couldn't yet put into words that men like Marcus Reed didn't come out of nowhere. That the darkness that had walked into this restaurant tonight had a source. And that the source might be closer to home than he wanted to admit. "Get him out of here," Adrian said quietly. "Alive. Do you understand me, Maya? Alive. I want to know why." Maya paused. In all her years working for him, she had never heard him say that word why about an enemy. Enemies didn't get a why. Enemies got handled. "Boss, you heard me." She nodded slowly and hauled Marcus to his feet. Adrian stayed on his knees a moment longer. Around him, the restaurant was in ruins of a different kind. Overturned chairs, a shattered wine glass, people clutching each other. A manager named Victor Hale, standing pale and useless against the wall. The same manager who had told Claire 20 minutes earlier that she was imagining things, that she was a waitress and not security, that one more word would cost her the job she needed to keep her brother alive. Adrian's eyes found Victor across the room, and Victor felt that gaze land on him like a physical weight, and every drop of blood drained out of his face. Because Lily was talking fast and tearful, telling Adrian everything, now the words tumbling out. How the waitress had seen the man first, how she'd tried to warn someone, how she'd gone to the manager more than once, and the manager had threatened to fire her, had called her hysterical, had sent her away. "She knew," Lily was saying. "She knew before anyone. She tried to tell him and he wouldn't listen, and she went anyway. She came for me anyway, even after he—" Adrian rose to his feet, slowly. And when he was standing, when he had drawn himself up to his full height in that ruined room, he looked like exactly what he was, and everyone remembered all at once who they were dealing with. He walked toward Victor Hale. "You," Adrian said. His voice was very soft. Somehow that was worse than shouting. "She came to you. She told you there was a man about to hurt someone, and you threatened to fire her." "Mr. Voss," Victor stammered. I couldn't have known. She knew." "Sir, she's a waitress. She's not what," Adrian said. "Finish it. She's not what exactly? Not important. Not worth listening to. Not worth as much as the people at my table." He took another step, and Victor pressed himself flat against the wall. "That woman saw what your entire security staff and my own people missed. She saw it because she was the only person in this room paying attention to anything other than herself. And you told her to be quiet. You told her to know her place." Victor had no words left. His mouth opened and closed. "I'm going to remember your face," Adrian said. And then he turned away because there were more important things than Victor Hale and always would be, and he'd wasted enough breath on a small man on the worst night of a great woman's life. He walked toward the doors, toward the car, toward the hospital, where they were racing a stranger's heartbeat against the clock. Lily hurried beside him, holding his arm, and he let her, and neither of them spoke. But in his pocket, his hand had found the photograph again. The little boy. The gap in his teeth. My whole heart. Adrian Voss had walked into that restaurant as a man who believed the world was made of prices and leverage and fear, a man who had never in his adult life been surprised by another human being. And he was walking out of it changed in a way he did not yet understand, carrying a bent photograph of a child he'd never met, chasing the fading heartbeat of a woman who had refused to be the room. She had asked for nothing. That was the part he couldn't get past. In a lifetime of people wanting things from him, one exhausted waitress had given everything and wanted nothing, and she'd looked at him like his question didn't even make sense. She needed help. He got into the car. Lily climbed in beside him, still trembling. Ahead of them, the second vehicle carried Claire, and Maya's voice crackled through the phone that Claire was still breathing, still holding on. The doctor was ready. They were 4 minutes out. Adrian looked down at the photograph one more time. "Find out everything about her," he said quietly. "Her name, where she lives, this boy, everything." He closed his hand around the picture, gentle, careful, like it might tear. "And Maya, whatever it costs to keep her alive tonight, there is no number. Do you understand me? There is no number." The car pulled away into the dark city, and inside it, a man who had spent 20 years never owing anyone anything sat holding a stranger's photograph, trying to understand for the very first time in his life what it meant to owe someone everything. He didn't know yet who Claire Bennett really was. He didn't know about the sick little brother, or the loan the bank had refused, or the years she'd spent drowning in silence and smiling through it so a child wouldn't see her fear. He didn't know that the woman bleeding in the car ahead of him had been carrying a weight that would have broken almost anyone, and carrying it alone, and never once complaining, and never once letting go. But he was about to find out. And when he did, Adrian Voss, the man. They whispered about the man who feared nothing. The man who believed everything in this world had a price was going to discover that he had just met the one person alive who could not be bought. The one person who was about to teach him what real power actually was. The car ahead of them ran 3 red lights and nobody stopped it because Maya Torres had made calls that most people couldn't make, and when Adrian's vehicle finally screamed up to the emergency entrance of the private hospital, there were already doctors waiting on the curb. They pulled Claire from the back seat, and she was so pale that Lily made a sound Adrian had never heard from her before, a small, broken sound, and buried her face against his shoulder. "Don't look," Adrian said, holding his sister. But he looked. He couldn't stop looking. They wheeled Claire through the doors, and the doors swallowed her, and then there was nothing to do but wait. And Adrian Voss was a man who had never in his life been good at waiting. He paced. He stood. He sat. He stood again. Lily curled into a plastic chair with her knees pulled up to her chest, still in her birthday dress, and every few minutes she whispered the same thing half to herself. She said, "Don't be afraid." She said, "I'm here." "I know," Adrian said. "A stranger said that to me." "I know." An hour passed, then another. Maya came and went, reporting in low tones. The attacker was secured. The police had questions, but the police could wait. Adrian's people were handling it their own way first. And the woman had a name now. Claire Bennett, Maya said. 26, lives in Queens. No parents. They died when she was 17. No husband, no partner. And there's a kid. Adrian's head came up. The boy in the photograph. Noah, her brother, 8 years old. Maya paused, and something in her voice changed, went careful. "Boss, the kid's sick. Serious heart condition. He needs surgery, and it looks like she's been trying to pay for it for years. There's a stack of denied loans, medical debt. She's been drowning." Adrian didn't say anything for a long moment. He was thinking about a little girl in a hospital just like this one 20 years ago, when he'd been young and poor and powerless himself before the empire, before the name people whispered. He didn't let himself think about that memory often. He'd buried it deep the way he'd buried everything soft in him. But Maya's words had reached down and pulled it up into the light, and now he couldn't put it back. "Where's the boy right now?" he asked. "With a neighbor. An older woman, Mrs. Alvarez, watches him when Claire works nights. She doesn't know anything's happened yet." "She needs to know her sister." Adrian stopped. "Her brother needs to know she's alive." "You want me to tell an 8-year-old with a bad heart that his sister took a knife for a stranger?" Maya said flatly. "That's not a phone call. That's not something you tell a sick kid over the phone in the middle of the night." Adrian rubbed a hand over his face. She was right. She was almost always right. It was why he kept her close. "Then we wait until she's stable," he said, "until we can tell him she's going to be fine." "And if she's not going to be fine," Adrian looked at her, "she's going to be fine." It wasn't an answer. It was an order, the way he gave orders about things that weren't actually in his control, as if the force of his will could bend reality the way it bent men. Maya knew better than to argue. She nodded and went back to her phone. At the 4th hour, a surgeon came through the doors, still in scrubs, pulling the mask down from her tired face. Adrian was on his feet before she'd taken 3 steps. "She's alive," the surgeon said, and Lily burst into tears, and Adrian felt something in his chest unlock that he hadn't realized had been clenched shut. It was close. Whoever got her here that fast saved her life. A few more minutes, and we'd be having a very different conversation. She's stable now. She's going to have a hard recovery, but she's going to make it. When can she wake up? She's already surfacing, groggy, confused. She keeps asking about... The surgeon checked, unsure someone named Noah. Adrian closed his eyes. Of course she was. Of course the first word out of the mouth of a woman who had nearly died was the name of the child she loved. Not where am I, not what happened, not who did this. Noah. Her whole heart. Even unconscious, even torn open, this woman's first instinct was to take care of somebody else. Can I see her? Adrian asked. The surgeon hesitated. Family only normally. She doesn't have family, Adrian said, except a boy who can't be here. He held the surgeon's eyes. I'm paying for everything. The best of everything. Whatever she needs for as long as she needs it. That started the moment she hit that floor for my sister. So you tell me, does that make me family enough? The surgeon looked at him for a moment, and something in his voice must have reached her, because she nodded. 5 minutes, she said. She's very weak. Claire was awake when he came in. Barely. Her eyes were half open, unfocused, and there were tubes and monitors and all the machinery of survival humming around her, and she looked impossibly small in the white bed. But when the door opened, her eyes tracked toward it, and when they landed on Adrian, she blinked slowly, trying to place him. She started and stopped. Her voice was a wreck. You were at the table, with the girl. The girl is my sister, Adrian said. He pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat, which put him lower than her looking up, and he did it on purpose, though he couldn't have said why. Her name is Lily. You saved her life. Claire's brow furrowed like she was working through a difficult problem. Is she okay? She's fine. She's outside. She's not hurt at all, because of you. Good, Claire breathed, and her eyes drifted closed, and for a second Adrian thought she'd slipped back under. Then they opened again, and this time there was fear in them, sharp and sudden. My brother, Noah, I was supposed to be home. He gets scared when I'm not. What time is it? I need to call Mrs. Alvarez. She was trying to sit up. The monitors protested. She didn't have the strength to lift her own shoulders off the pillow, but she was trying anyway, because a child needed her, and Adrian saw the exact moment her body failed her, and the panic that flooded her face when it did. Stop, he said gently, and put a hand on her shoulder, the lightest pressure easing her back down. Stop, listen to me. Noah is safe. He's with Mrs. Alvarez. He's asleep. He's fine. I promise you he's fine. Claire went still. She stared at him. How do you know his name? She whispered. How do you know about Mrs. Alvarez? And there it was, the fear a woman like Claire carried her whole life, the reflexive terror that a powerful man knowing anything about her child could only mean danger. Adrian saw it and understood it and hated that she had to feel it. Because I had someone find out, he said honestly. Because when a woman saves my sister's life, I want to know who she is. That's all. Nobody is going near your brother. Nobody is going to touch him. You have my word, and my word is the only thing in this world I've never broken. He paused. Your photograph fell out of your apron. I've been holding it all night. I didn't want to lose it before I could give it back to you. He reached into his jacket and took out the bent little picture and set it in her hand, closing her fingers around it. Claire looked down at Noah's gap-toothed smile, and her whole face crumpled, and she began to cry, silent and exhausted, the tears just sliding down into her hair because she was too weak to even wipe them away. I thought I was going to die on that floor, she whispered, and all I could think was, who's going to take care of him? Who's going to give him his medicine in the morning? He won't take it for anyone else. He hides it under his tongue and spits it out. Only I can get him to take it. She was crying harder now. I can't die. Do you understand? I'm not allowed to die. There's no one else. Adrian Voss had watched men beg for their lives. He'd watched people plead, negotiate, offer him everything they had. He had sat unmoved through more human desperation than most people saw in 10 lifetimes, and he had felt nothing because he'd taught himself to feel nothing, because feeling was a weakness his world punished. And this woman crying, not because she was afraid to die, but because she was afraid of who would give a little boy his medicine, undid 20 years of that in about 4 seconds. You're not going to die, he said, and his voice was rough. You're going to live, and you're going to get strong, and you're going to give your brother his medicine yourself. Every morning, for a very long time. He leaned forward. And Claire Noah is going to get his surgery. She stopped crying. She stared at him. His heart? Adrian said. The surgery he needs, the one the banks wouldn't give you the money for. It's already handled. It's done. The best surgeon in the country. He'll be scheduled the moment he's ready. You never have to think about the money again. Not for him, not for you, not ever. For a moment, Claire didn't react at all. And Adrian expected what he always got, what he'd gotten his entire adult life when he told people he'd solved their problems. The flood of gratitude, the tears of relief, the thank you, thank you, thank you. The immediate recalibration in someone's eyes as they realized they'd just been made rich, made safe, made his. That's not what happened. Not. What happened was that Claire Bennett, half dead in a hospital bed, looked at the most dangerous man in the city and said no. Adrian blinked. What? No, she said again, and there was something in her voice now that hadn't been there before, something with a spine in it. I can't take that. Claire, I don't even know you, she said. You're telling me you're paying for my brother's heart surgery, a surgery that costs more money than I'll make in my entire life, and I'm supposed to just say yes to a stranger. She shook her head weakly against the pillow. My whole life, when something looks too good, it's because someone wants something back. And what you're offering isn't good, it's impossible. So what is it you want from me? Just tell me. Tell me what the price is. And there it was. The price. She thought there was a price because in her world, the same as in his, there always had been. Two people from two completely opposite ends of everything, and they'd both learned the exact same lesson about how the world worked. Everything costs something. Nothing is free. The hand that feeds you is the hand that owns you. For the first time, Adrian understood that she wasn't naive. That was what he'd almost mistaken it for at the restaurant, this reckless goodness. He'd almost thought she was simple, a woman too foolish to protect herself. But she wasn't foolish at all. She knew exactly how the world worked. She'd been ground down by it her whole life. She just refused to let it turn her into someone who did the calculation before helping a frightened girl. There's no price, Adrian said quietly. There's always a price. Not this time. Why not? Claire demanded, and a little strength was coming back into her, now fueled by something like anger. Why would you do this? Rich men don't pay for poor kids' surgeries out of the goodness of their hearts. I've been begging for help for 2 years. 2 years. I filled out every form, I went to every office I got on every list, and I got told no, no, no. And now a man I've never met walks into a hospital room and says, "Here, have a miracle." No. Things don't work like that. Not for people like me. So there's a catch. There's always a catch. Adrian was quiet for a moment, and then he told her the truth, which was not a thing he did often, because in his life the truth was a luxury he usually couldn't afford. You want to know why? He said. I'll tell you why. Tonight a man walked into that restaurant to kill my sister, and 100 people ran away from her. My own security ran the wrong direction. I stood there and I froze, and I watched death come for the only person I love, and I couldn't stop it. Nobody could. Nobody would. Except a woman I'd never spoken to who had every reason in the world to run like everyone else and who ran toward the knife instead. He leaned closer. You didn't know she was rich. You didn't know she was connected to me. You didn't know there was anything to gain. You thought she was a nobody, a frightened kid, and you bled for her anyway. Do you understand how rare that is? Do you understand that I've spent my entire life looking for one person, just one who would do something like that and want nothing, and I never found them. Until tonight. Claire was staring at him, silent now. So no, Claire, there's no price, Adrian said. This isn't me buying you. This is me trying badly in the only way I know how to answer a debt I can never actually pay. You gave my sister back to me. There's no dollar amount on earth that equals that. Paying for one surgery for one little boy isn't me being generous. It's me being so far in your debt that I'll never climb out and both of us knowing it. She didn't say anything for a long time. The monitors beeped softly. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled past. I still can't take it, she finally said, and her voice had gone quiet and raw. Not the way you're saying it, not as a payment for a life, because if I take money for saving your sister, then that's what I did it for. And I didn't. And I won't let that become the reason, even after the fact. Do you understand? That night is the only thing I've done in years that I'm actually proud of. It's the one moment I was exactly the person I always wanted to be. And I won't sell it. I won't turn it into a transaction. It's the only clean thing I have left, and I'm keeping it clean even if it kills me. And Adrian Voss, who owned half the leverage in that city, sat in silence because for the first time he had come up against something he could not buy, could not move, could not overpower, and did not in his heart want to. "Then don't take it as payment," he said at last. "Take it as—" He stopped, searched for a word he'd never had to use. "Take it as a gift, from someone who has too much and never had a good reason to spend it on anything that mattered. Let it matter. Let Noah be the thing it matters on. You don't have to owe me anything. You don't ever have to speak to me again after tonight if that's what you want. But let the kid have his heart fixed, Claire. Don't let your pride be the thing that stops it. He's 8. He didn't do anything to deserve dying because his sister was too proud to let a stranger help." It was, he would realize later, exactly the right thing to say, and also somewhat cruel, and he'd said it on instinct, because manipulating people toward the outcome he wanted was the one skill he'd never turned off. But this time, he wasn't doing it for himself. He was doing it because he'd looked at that photograph all night, and he couldn't stand the thought of that gap-toothed smile going out of the world over something as stupid as money. Claire closed her eyes. 2 more tears slid down. "Only for Noah," she whispered. "The surgery, his treatment, that's all I'll take. Nothing for me. I'll pay you back for my own, for the hospital, for tonight. I'll find a way. "You will not pay me back for saving your own life after you saved my sister's," Adrian said, and there was iron in it now. "That's not a negotiation. But fine, only Noah. If that's how you need it to be, only Noah." She nodded barely and let out a shaking breath, and Adrian watched something ease in her some knot she'd been carrying so long she'd probably forgotten it was there. The surgery. The thing she'd been drowning under for 2 years, the thing that had eaten every dollar and every sleepless night, the impossible mountain gone. Just like that. And she'd fought it. She'd nearly refused a miracle out of sheer stubborn dignity, and that was the thing that Adrian couldn't stop turning over in his mind because it was so completely backwards from everyone he'd ever known. "I'd like to meet him," Adrian said. "Noah, when you're ready. Not to intrude, I just—" He stopped uncharacteristically at a loss. "You've talked about him. I'd like to meet the person who's worth all of this to you." Claire opened her eyes and looked at him, and for the first time there was the ghost of something warmer in her face, something that wasn't fear or suspicion or exhaustion. "He'll like you," she said, and it surprised her as much as it surprised him. "He likes everybody. He hasn't learned yet not to." A pause. "I keep trying to teach him to be careful, and I keep hoping he never actually learns it." Adrian understood that too. He'd spent Lily's whole life trying to keep her innocent, trying to keep the ugliness of his world from ever touching her, and he'd nearly gotten her killed for the sin of taking her to dinner. He didn't say that, but he understood it. He stayed longer than the 5 minutes he'd been given. The surgeon looked in twice, and seeing that Claire was calm, said nothing. And eventually Claire's eyes grew heavy and slid shut, and this time they stayed shut, and her breathing evened into sleep, real sleep, the deep kind of a body finally allowed to rest after being wound tight for years. Adrian sat beside her for a while longer, watching over a stranger the way she'd watched over his sister. Then he rose quietly and went out to where Lily was still curled in the plastic chair. "She's going to be okay," he told his sister. "She's asleep. She's going to make it." Lily grabbed his hand. "Adrian, we have to do something for her. We can't just—" "I know," he said. "It's handled, the boy's surgery, all of it." "That's not what I mean." Lily's eyes were fierce and wet. "I mean her, that manager. The way you told me they treated her there, how he threatened to fire her when she tried to warn people. I mean the whole life she has where she does something that brave and goes home to that. We can't just pay a hospital bill and walk away like that fixes it." She squeezed his hand. "You didn't see her face when she was holding me. I did. Nobody's taken care of that woman in her entire life. Everybody's just taken from her, and she still had enough left to give it to me." Adrian looked at his little sister, 19 years old, saying the truest thing anyone had said to him in years, and he felt an old, cold thing in his chest crack a little wider. "You're right," he said. "So what are we going to do?" Adrian didn't answer right away, because the honest answer was that he didn't fully know yet that meeting Claire Bennett had knocked something loose in him that he hadn't finished feeling, and that the plan forming in the back of his mind was one that would take him places he'd sworn he'd never go and unmake things he'd spent 20 years building. He didn't say any of that to Lily. What he said was, "We're going to make sure she never has to be afraid again." But even as he said it, something else was pulling at the edges of his mind, dark and insistent, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. Because there was still the matter of the man in the fake uniform. The man who'd walked in to kill his sister. The man now sitting in a locked room in one of Adrian's buildings with Maya's people, watching him, waiting for Adrian to decide what happened to him. Adrian had told her to keep him alive. He'd told her he wanted to know why, and in 20 years, he'd never once cared about the why. And now, standing in a hospital hallway at 4 a.m. with his sister's hand in his, Adrian finally let himself ask the question he'd been avoiding all night. Because attacks like that didn't come from nowhere. Men didn't put on a costume and walk into a restaurant to murder a 19-year-old girl who'd never hurt anyone in her life for no reason. Someone had sent that man, or that man had a reason of his own, and either way the reason led back to one place. It led back to Adrian. It led back to the empire he'd built, the fear he'd sold, the things he'd done, and the people he'd broken to keep himself and his sister safe. He'd built all of it to protect Lily, every ruthless thing, every enemy he'd made, every family he'd ruined, every choice that had earned him the whispered name people were too scared to say out loud. He'd told himself it was all for her, to keep her safe, to keep the world from ever touching her. And tonight the world had walked right up to her with a knife, wearing a waiter's uniform, because of him, because of the empire, because of the fear. The very thing he'd built to protect her was the thing that had nearly gotten her killed. Claire hadn't known any of that when she stepped in front of that blade. She'd just seen a frightened girl. She'd been the only clean thing in a room full of Adrian's consequences. "Adrian," Lily said, "you went somewhere." "I'm here," he said. And then hearing the echo of what a waitress had whispered to his sister a few hours before something moved across his face that Lily had never seen there. "That's what she said to you, isn't it? Don't be afraid, I'm here." "Yeah," Lily whispered. Adrian was quiet. "Somebody said that to me once," he said finally. "A long time ago, before you were old enough to remember, before all of this." He didn't explain. He didn't say who. He just stood there holding his sister's hand in a hospital hallway, a man who'd spent 2 decades convincing the world and himself that he felt nothing, discovering at 4 a.m. that he'd only ever been very good at pretending. He looked back at the door of Claire's room. "Take the car home," he told Lily. "Get some sleep. Maya will stay with you." "Where are you going?" Adrian's jaw tightened, and the softness that had been in his face for the last few hours folded back down into something colder, something older, something that had kept him alive in a world that ate gentle men. "I have to go talk to the man who tried to take you from me," he said. "I need to know who sent him, and I need to know if there's another one coming." He didn't say the rest. He didn't say that some part of him already suspected the answer, that some part of him already knew. That when he sat down across from that man and asked why the story he heard was going to be about a family destroyed, about a life ruined, about consequences that had Adrian's own fingerprints all over them. He didn't say that he was afraid for the first time in years of what he might learn about himself. He just kissed his sister on the forehead the way he had since she was small and walked toward the elevator and left Claire Bennett sleeping safely behind him with a bent photograph of a little boy clutched in her hand. The woman who'd asked for nothing, who'd refused a fortune, who'd kept the one clean thing she had, and who had no idea that in a few short hours she'd rearranged the entire inner world of the most dangerous man in the city. The elevator doors closed around him, and Adrian Voss went down to find out exactly how much of tonight had been his own fault. The room where they were holding Marcus Reed was in the basement of a building Adrian owned, but did not officially exist on any of his records. And when Adrian walked in at nearly 5 a.m, the man in the chair looked up at him with an expression that stopped Adrian cold. He'd expected fear. Everyone was afraid when Adrian walked in. He'd expected defiance maybe, or the blank flatness of a professional who knew he was already dead. What he had not expected was the look Marcus Reed gave him, which was something closer to relief, like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time and was at last about to be allowed to set it down. "There he is," Marcus said quietly. "The great Adrian Voss, come to do it himself. Good. I wanted it to be you." Maya was standing against the wall. She caught Adrian's eye and shook her head slightly, which meant the man hadn't talked, hadn't given a name, hadn't given anyone who'd sent him. Adrian nodded once, and Maya stepped out, closing the door, leaving the two of them alone. Adrian pulled a chair across from the man and sat. "You know my name," Adrian said. "I don't know yours." Marcus Reed. The name meant nothing to Adrian. He searched it, turned it over, waited for it to connect to some enemy, some rival, some deal gone wrong. Nothing. And that somehow was worse because it meant this wasn't business. Business he understood. Business had rules. "You walked into a restaurant tonight to kill a 19-year-old girl," Adrian said. "My sister. She's never hurt anyone. She's never done anything to anyone. So before I decide what happens to you, I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to think very carefully about your answer." He leaned forward. "Why?" Marcus laughed. It wasn't a good laugh. It was the laugh of a man standing at the bottom of something. "You really don't know," he said. "That's the part I couldn't believe when I planned this. You genuinely have no idea who I am. You did what you did to my family and you don't even remember. That's how small we were to you. We were so small you didn't even keep the memory." Adrian went very still. "Explain," he said. "4 years ago," Marcus said, "you needed a piece of property, a block of old buildings down by the water. There was a construction deal, a big one, and those buildings were sitting right in the middle of what you wanted, and the people who lived there wouldn't sell. My father wouldn't sell. He'd owned his little shop on the ground floor for 30 years. It was everything he had. It was everything we had." Marcus's voice was steady, but his hands cuffed in front of him had started to tremble. "So your people came. First they offered money, then when he still said no, they stopped offering money. There was a fire, Mr. Voss, in the middle of the night. They said it was an accident. Bad wiring, they said. Old building." Adrian didn't move. "My father was inside," Marcus said. "He didn't get out. My mother pulled him from the building, and he lived another 11 months in a hospital bed, and then he didn't. And the medical bills took everything the insurance didn't, and my mother lost the will to fight, and 18 months after my father burned, she was gone too. And I sat in a courtroom and watched your lawyers make the whole thing disappear. Watched them turn my father's death into a paperwork error, and I watched you. You walk out of that courthouse and get into a car and drive away without so much as turning your head. Because we were nothing. We were a line item. We were the cost of doing business." The room was silent for a long time. Adrian remembered the deal. Not the man, not the father, not the fire, not the shop, none of the specifics, but the deal. Yes, the block by the water. He remembered signing off on it and moving on to the next thing, and never once thinking about the people who'd been living in the middle of what he wanted. He'd given an order, handle it, 2 words. He'd said them 1,000 times and never once followed the thread of what happened after, because following the thread was for people who couldn't afford to sleep at night, and Adrian had trained himself to sleep just fine. And now the thread had followed him back. It had put on a waiter's uniform and walked into his sister's birthday dinner with a blade, and it had a name and a face and a dead father and a dead mother and a laugh like the bottom of a well. "You wanted to hurt me," Adrian said finally. His voice had gone quiet. "So you came for Lily." "I wanted you to feel it," Marcus said, and now the steadiness broke, and something raw came pouring out of him. "I wanted you to know exactly what it feels like to have the one person you'd burn the world for taken from you by someone who doesn't even feel it. Someone who signs a piece of paper and moves on. I wanted you to sit in a hospital and watch her die slow and know there was nothing your money could do. I wanted you to feel what I felt watching my father cough up smoke for 11 months. I wanted us to be even." "And a waitress got in the way," Adrian said. Marcus's face changed. Something moved behind his eyes, something like shame. "I saw her go down," he said more quietly. "The woman. I saw her throw herself in front of your sister and take it. And I stood there for a second and I thought—" He stopped, swallowed. "I thought I've become the thing that did this to me. I came here to make an orphan out of somebody the way somebody made an orphan out of me. And this stranger, this waitress, she was willing to die to stop it, and I was willing to kill a girl who never did anything, and I couldn't even—" His voice cracked. In that second, I didn't know which one of us was the monster anymore, her or me, and I knew it was me. It was me. It was— Adrian sat with that. He had come down here expecting to find an enemy, a rival, a hire, a professional, someone he could understand in the language he'd spoken. His whole life, power leveraged the calculus of threat. Instead, he'd found a broken man who was a mirror. A man who had loved someone so much he'd been willing to destroy himself to avenge them. A man who had made exactly the choice Adrian would have made in a life that Adrian had personally destroyed. The most dangerous realization of Adrian's entire life arrived quietly in a basement at 5 a.m. I made this. I made him. He is my son in the only way that matters. He is what my choices produce. How many others, Adrian said, and his voice didn't sound like his own. The block by the water, my whole life. How many others are out there like you? How many fathers? How many mothers? How many families that I turned into a line item because they were standing where I wanted to build? How many Marcuses am I walking past every single day waiting for one of them to finally do what you did tonight? Marcus said nothing. That's what you came here to teach me, Adrian said. Isn't it? Not just to hurt me, to make me count. I came here to kill your sister, Marcus said flatly. Don't make it noble. I came here to make you suffer, and I would have done it. The only reason I didn't is a waitress was faster than me. Don't you dare turn what I did into a lesson so you can feel better about yourself. My father is still dead. Your fire still killed him. Nothing that happens in this room brings him back, and nothing you say changes what you are. And that Adrian thought was the most honest thing anyone had said to him in 20 years. Because Marcus was right. It would be so easy, so seductively easy, to sit here and let this become a story about Adrian's redemption, a lesson gifted to him by the universe, a wise villain teaching him to be better. And that would be one more way of making Marcus's father into a line item, one more way of taking a man's whole ruined life and turning it into something that was in the end about Adrian. He wouldn't do it. He owed the dead that much. You're right, Adrian said. It's not a lesson. It's not noble. Your father's dead because of me, and no amount of me feeling terrible about it puts breath back in his body. I'm not going to insult you by pretending my guilt is worth anything to you. It isn't. It's worth nothing to you at all, he paused. But it's worth something to me. And it's worth something to the next family, because I'm going to make sure there isn't one. Marcus looked at him warily. What does that mean? Adrian didn't answer that directly. Instead, he stood and walked to the door and opened it and told Maya to come in. She came and stood and waited for the order she'd been waiting for all night. The order that in the old days would have meant Marcus Reed disappeared and was never spoken of again. She'd seen Adrian give that order before to men who'd done far less than try to murder his sister. She fully expected to hear it now. Take the cuffs off him, Adrian said. Maya blinked. Boss, take them off. He tried to kill Lily. He walked into that room to put a knife in your sister, and you want me to— I know what he did, Adrian said, and I know why he did it, and I know whose fault it is that a man like him exists in the first place. He looked at Marcus. Take the cuffs off. He's not going anywhere. Are you Marcus? Marcus stared at him. What are you doing? Something I've never done, Adrian said. I'm going to hand you to the police, the real police, not the ones I own. You're going to be arrested and charged and tried in a real court for what you did tonight. You'll go to prison. You attacked a girl in front of 100 witnesses. There's no version of this where you walk free, and I'm not going to make one for you. He held the man's eyes. But you're going to be alive. You're going to get a trial. You're going to get everything my lawyers made sure your father never got. And when it's done, when you've served your time, there's going to be something waiting for you. I'm setting up money in your name, not a bribe, not to keep you quiet. You can tell the whole world what I did to your family. I hope you do. It's the truth, and it should be told. But there's going to be enough waiting that when you come out, you don't come out into nothing, because your family came out into nothing, and I did that, and I can't undo it. But I can make sure it stops with you. The room was dead silent. Maya had gone completely still against the wall because in 10 years of working for Adrian Voss, she had never once heard him do anything remotely like this. And she was watching a man she thought she knew turn into someone she'd never met. Marcus's face was working, fighting itself, 20 years of rage crashing into something it had never expected to encounter. "You think that fixes it?" Marcus said, and his voice was shaking now, really shaking. "You think money fixes it? You think—" "No," Adrian said. "I don't think it fixes anything. I told you that already. Nothing fixes it. Your father's still dead. I said that. I'll say it as many times as you need to hear it. I'm not doing this to fix it. I'm doing it because a woman took a knife for a stranger tonight and asked for nothing, and I've spent my whole life doing the exact opposite of that. And I'm done. That's all. This isn't for you. I wish it were, but it's not. It's because I finally understand what I am, and I can't be it anymore." And Marcus Reed, a man who had come to that city to kill a girl and destroy himself in the process, put his face in his unshackled hands and wept because rage was the only thing that had held him together for 4 years. And Adrian had just taken it apart, and there was nothing underneath it but grief. And grief was so much heavier to carry than hate. Adrian did not comfort him. He hadn't earned the right, and he knew it. He simply stood there and let the man cry. And when Maya moved to intervene, he raised a hand and stopped her. And the three of them stayed in that basement while a broken man wept for a father Adrian had killed with 2 words 4 years ago. It was almost 6 in the morning when Adrian finally climbed back up out of the basement and into the gray light of a new day. And he felt like a different person than the one who'd gone down. He'd walked down those stairs as the most dangerous man in the city, and he'd walked back up as something he didn't have a name for yet, a man who'd finally, at 41 years old, looked directly at the total sum of what he'd done and decided he could not carry on being the person who'd done it. Maya caught up to him at the top of the stairs. "Adrian," she said, "stop. What's happening? I've worked for you for 10 years, and I have never— You were going to have him disappear. 2 hours ago, you would have had him disappear and not lost a minute of sleep, and now you're setting up a fund for him, handing him to the actual police. What is going on with you?" Decisions and never flinched. She deserved an honest answer. "A woman I've never met threw her body in front of a knife for Lily tonight," Adrian said. "And then she woke up in a hospital bed and I offered her enough money to change her whole life, and she said no. She said she wouldn't take it because she didn't save my sister to get paid, and she wasn't going to let me turn the one good thing she'd ever done into a transaction." He shook his head slowly. "Do you understand what that is, Maya? I've spent 20 years believing everyone has a price. It was the foundation of everything. And in one night, I met one person who doesn't, and it turns out the whole foundation was rotten. If she can be that doing double shifts to pay for a kid's heart, then what's my excuse? What has ever been my excuse?" Maya was quiet. "The block by the water," she said slowly. 4 years ago. That's who he is. That's what this was about." "You knew." "I knew there was a fire," Maya said carefully. "I knew a man died. I didn't, Adrian. That's the business. That's the business we've always been in. You can't suddenly decide 4 years later that—" "I can, though," Adrian said. "That's the thing I figured out tonight. I can decide that. It turns out I could have decided it any day for the last 20 years. I just never did, because it was easier not to." He looked at her. "A waitress with holes in her shoes decided to be a good person tonight when it could have cost her everything. I've got more money than 100 people could spend in 100 lifetimes, and I've been telling myself I couldn't afford to be decent. That's a lie, Maya. It was always a lie. I just liked it better than the truth." Maya didn't have an answer for that. For the first time in a decade, the woman who always had an answer just stood there. "There's going to be more of them," Adrian said quietly. "More Marcuses. I can feel it. 20 years of handle it. There are people out there right now who hate me the way he does and have every right to. And I can't undo the fire or the ones before it or the ones I don't even remember. But I can stop making new ones, starting now, starting today." He started walking again. "Get me a full accounting. Everything. Every deal like that block, every family, every fire, every accident, every person we turned into a line item. I want names. I want to know exactly how much damage I've done down to the last person. Adrian, that list is going to be... Maya stopped. That list is going to destroy you. If any of it ever gets out. Then let it get out, Adrian said. Marcus can tell the world. So can everyone on that list. I'm done being protected from the truth of my own life. Get me the accounting. He reached the door to the street and paused with his hand on it, and something occurred to him. And Maya, he said, the manager, from the restaurant, Victor Hale. Maya tensed because she'd heard that tone before, and it usually preceded something bad for whoever's name came before it. He humiliated her, Adrian said. For months, apparently. He threatened to fire her tonight when she tried to warn people there was a killer in the room. She was the only person who saw it, and he called her hysterical and told her to know her place. Adrian's jaw tightened. Old me would have ruined him, buried him, made sure he never worked again and enjoyed watching it. And knew you. Adrian thought about it. Genuinely thought about it. And then to his own surprise, he almost smiled, though there was no warmth in it. New me is going to buy the restaurant, he said, quietly. And then I'm going to fire Victor Hale personally, and I'm going to make sure he understands exactly why. Not because I'm punishing him for me. Because a man who treats the people under him like they're disposable is exactly the kind of small evil I've been telling myself doesn't count. It counts. It all counts. It always counted. He pushed the door open. That's the whole thing I learned tonight, Maya. It all counts. Every single person. I just spent 20 years pretending it didn't. He stepped out into the cold morning air, and somewhere across the city in a hospital bed, Claire Bennett was still sleeping, still clutching a photograph of a little boy with no idea that in a single night she had reached into the chest of the most feared man in the city and turned something back on that had been switched off for 2 decades. She hadn't tried to. She hadn't wanted anything from him. That was the whole reason it had worked. But Adrian's morning was not done delivering its blows, because when he got to the car, Maya's phone rang and she answered it, and Adrian watched her face change, watched the professional calm slide off it, and something like alarm slide on, and when she lowered the phone, her voice was careful in the way it got when the news was bad. That was the hospital, she said. Adrian's chest went tight. Claire's fine. She's stable. She's fine. Maya hesitated. It's the boy. It's Noah. Adrian went cold all over. What about him? He had an episode, Maya said. Overnight, at the neighbor's, his heart. The old woman, Mrs. Alvarez, she couldn't wake him properly, and she called an ambulance, and Adrian, they've got him at a different hospital, a public one, and it's bad. The surgeon you lined up the surgery, you're paying for it, was supposed to be scheduled for weeks from now when he was stable enough. But his heart isn't waiting weeks. His heart is failing now. Tonight. And nobody's told Claire yet because Claire is lying in a bed across town recovering from surgery herself, and she doesn't know that while she was saving your sister's life, her little brother was 2 miles away dying. Adrian stood frozen in the gray morning, and every ounce of the power he'd spent his whole life accumulating, every dollar, every connection, every terrible thing he'd ever done to make himself untouchable, suddenly meant nothing at all against the only thing that mattered. A little boy's failing heart, and a woman who was about to wake up and learn that the whole reason she'd kept breathing, the whole reason she'd refused to die on that restaurant floor, was slipping away from her in a hospital she didn't even know he was in. Get the car, Adrian said. Get the surgeon. Get everyone now. And for the first time in 20 years, Adrian Voss ran. The public hospital across town was not the kind of place Adrian Voss had ever set foot in. It was overcrowded and understaffed, and the fluorescent lights buzzed, and the waiting room was full of people who had learned the way Claire had learned that being poor meant waiting and being told no. Adrian came through those doors at 6:40 in the morning like a force of nature with Maya beside him, and the best pediatric cardiac surgeon in the country on the phone in his hand, and the tired staff at the desk looked up at this man in a $1,000 coat and had no idea what was about to hit them. There's a boy, Adrian said, Noah Bennett, 8 years old, heart failure. He came in overnight. Where is he? The nurse at the desk started to give him the speech about family, only about privacy, about how she couldn't just... I am paying for everything, Adrian said, cutting through it, and his voice was not loud, but it had a quality that made the whole desk stop. Every test, every specialist, every hour, whatever this hospital doesn't have, I am bringing. Dr. Halloran is on this phone right now, the best cardiac surgeon in the country, and he is on his way here as we speak. So I am going to ask you one more time, and I need you to help me, because there is a little boy in this building whose heart is stopping, and there is a woman across the city who will not survive losing him. Where is Noah? Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was the surgeon's name. Or maybe it was something in Adrian's face. Some naked desperation that didn't belong on a man dressed like that, but the nurse stopped fighting him. She looked at her screen. Her face changed. "Pediatric ICU," she said. "Third floor. But sir, it's bad. They've been working on him since 4. Adrian was already moving. The pediatric ICU was a place Adrian would never forget as long as he lived. Behind a glass wall, impossibly small against a bed, built for someone 3 times his size, lay the boy from the photograph. Noah Bennett. The gap-toothed smile. My whole heart. Except there was no smile now. There was a tube down his throat, and a dozen wires on his chest, and a machine breathing for him and around him, a team of exhausted doctors moving with the particular controlled urgency that meant they were losing. An older woman sat outside the glass, gray-haired, her hands twisted together, praying in Spanish under her breath. "Mrs. Alvarez." She looked up when Adrian and Maya approached, and her eyes were red and terrified. "Are you?" she started. "Are you a doctor?" "Are you from the Please Please? They won't tell me anything. They keep saying, he's critical. They keep saying, his sister. I have to reach his sister. Claire. She doesn't answer her phone. She never doesn't answer. Something's wrong. I know something's wrong. And now the baby is—" Her voice broke completely. Adrian crouched down in front of the old woman, this man who never lowered himself for anyone, and he took her twisted hands in his. "Claire is safe," he said. "She's in a hospital across the city. She's hurt, but she's going to be okay. She saved a girl's life last night and she got hurt doing it, and that's why she hasn't answered. She doesn't know Noah is here. She doesn't know yet." He held the woman's hands tighter. "But I do. And I brought help. The best help there is. I need you to trust me for a few minutes. Can you do that?" Mrs. Alvarez stared at him, this stranger, and something in his face must have carried the truth of it, because she nodded and gripped his hands like they were the only solid thing in the room. Adrian stood and turned to the glass. Dr. Halloran, still on the phone, was talking fast now, giving instructions, asking questions, and Adrian held the phone up to the glass so the surgeon inside could hear his colleague. And for the next 20 minutes, the 2 hospitals became one, the best surgeon in the country, reaching across the city through a phone in a criminal's hand to help a team of overworked strangers keep a poor kid's heart beating. 7 o'clock, then 7:15. Adrian stood at the glass and did not move. He had never prayed in his life. He didn't know how, but he stood at that glass and he made something like a bargain with a God he'd never spoken to, and the bargain was simple, and it was the most honest thing he'd ever said. "Take it from me, whatever it costs, take it out of me. I have 20 years of things I should have paid for. Start now, take anything you want, but not the boy, not her boy. She asked for nothing. Give her this." At 7:40, the door to the ICU opened, and a doctor came out pulling down her mask, and her face was gray with exhaustion, and Adrian's heart stopped. "He's stable," she said. "For now, we got him stable, but—" She looked at Adrian and at Mrs. Alvarez, trying to figure out who she was even talking to. "His heart can't keep doing this. The defect, he needs the surgery. He needed it months ago, honestly. He's been living on borrowed time, and the time just ran out. If he doesn't get into an operating room in the next day or 2, we're going to be right back here, and next time we might not—" She stopped. "He needs surgery, now, and it's a surgery this hospital isn't equipped to do well." "It's already paid for," Adrian said. "Dr. Halloran is on his way. He's the best in the country, and he's coming here to this hospital this morning, and if this hospital doesn't have what he needs, then I will have it here by noon, whatever it costs. There is no number." He'd said those words before about Claire in the dark hours of the night. He said them again now, and he meant them even more. "That boy is having his surgery today. Do you understand me, today?" The doctor stared at him like she didn't quite believe he was real. In her whole career, nobody had ever walked into this hospital and said those words. Here the answer was always no. Here the answer was always wait and hope and pray and lose. "Who are you?" she asked. Adrian looked through the glass at the small, still boy. "I'm nobody he's ever met," he said quietly. "I owe his sister a debt I can't pay. This is me starting." Meanwhile, across the city, Claire Bennett was waking up. It was the strangest thing, waking up. The pain came first, deep and wrong in her side, and then the confusion, and then slowly the memory. The restaurant, the man in the uniform, the girl, Lily, the blade, her own body hitting the floor. She surfaced out of it gasping, and a nurse was there instantly telling her to breathe, telling her she was safe, telling her the surgery had gone well. And Claire, the way she always did, the way she'd done every single time she opened her eyes for 8 years, reached for the thought of Noah. And something was wrong. She couldn't have said how she knew, but she knew. It was the thing mothers know, the thing that Claire had become without ever choosing, to the animal wire that ran between her and that little boy. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her chest, colder than the surgical pain, a wrongness that had nothing to do with her own body. "My brother," she said. "Noah, where's my phone? I have to call. Where's my phone?" "You need to rest," the nurse said. "You just came out of—" "Where is my phone?" Claire was trying to sit up, and it was agony, and she didn't care. "Something's wrong with my brother. I have to reach him. I have to reach Mrs. Alvarez. Please, please, I'm not asking. I'm telling you something is wrong. I can feel it. Give me my phone." They tried to calm her. They couldn't. Because there is no calming a woman who knows in the deepest part of her that her child is in danger, and every second you keep her from him is a second she will never forgive. Claire was pulling at the wires on her own body now, and the monitors were screaming, and it took 2 nurses to keep her from getting out of the bed, and the whole time she was saying his name over and over. "Noah, Noah, something's wrong. Let me go to him. Let me go." And then the door opened and Lily Voss came in. Adrian had sent her. He'd called her from the public hospital and told her gently as he could that Noah was sick, that it was serious, that Claire couldn't be allowed to find out alone, that someone had to be with her who understood what it was to almost lose the person you loved most. And Lily, 19 years old, who had spent the whole night unable to stop thinking about the woman who'd saved her life, had gone without hesitation. She came in, and she saw Claire fighting. The nurses saw the terror on her face, and she crossed the room fast and took Claire's hand. "Claire," she said. "Claire, look at me. It's Lily. It's the girl from the restaurant, the one you saved. Look at me." Claire's wild eyes found her. "My brother—" "I know," Lily said, and her own eyes were already filling. "I know, Noah's sick. He had a bad night. But listen to me, listen. My brother is with him right now. Adrian. He's at the hospital with Noah right this second, and he brought the best heart surgeon in the whole country, and Noah is stable, Claire. He's stable. They're taking care of him. He's not alone. He's got more people fighting for him right now than he's ever had in his life. I promise you. I promise." Claire stopped fighting. She looked at Lily, this girl she'd thrown herself in front of a knife for, and the enormity of it all came crashing down on her at once, that she'd nearly died, that Noah was dying, that a man she'd met once was standing over her little brother's bed right now, with a surgeon she could never in 1,000 lifetimes have afforded, and she made a sound that wasn't quite crying, that was deeper and more broken than crying, and Lily climbed onto the edge of the bed and wrapped her arms around her, careful of the wound, and held her. "You held me last night," Lily whispered, "when I was scared. You held me and you told me not to be afraid. You said you were there." She was crying now, too. "So let me do it back. Don't be afraid, Claire. I'm here. I've got you. We've got you. Both of you." And Claire Bennett, who had spent 8 years being the one who held everyone else, who had never once let herself be held, who had smiled through terror. So a little boy wouldn't see her fear, finally let herself be caught by someone else, and she wept in the arms of a 19-year-old girl, while across the city a criminal she'd refused to take money from stood guard over her brother's failing heart. Noah went into surgery at 11 that morning. Dr. Halloran had arrived at 9, had taken one look at the boy and the scans and said what everyone was afraid of, which was that they couldn't wait, that the heart wouldn't survive another episode, that it had to be now. And so the surgery that Claire had spent 2 years begging for, the surgery, the banks had said no to the surgery that had been scheduled for weeks away, happened that same morning in a public hospital, transformed by a rich man's money into something that for one day worked the way medicine was supposed to work for everyone. Adrian did not leave. Maya brought him coffee he didn't drink. Mrs. Alvarez sat beside him and prayed, and at some point, without quite deciding to Adrian, found himself praying alongside her, badly silently in the only words he had. He'd arranged for Claire to be brought over the moment she was stable enough to move, and by early afternoon she was there in a wheelchair, pale and stitched, and refusing every instruction to rest, sitting beside Adrian, outside an operating room, the two of them keeping vigil over the same small heart. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. But at one point Claire looked at him. This man she'd refused. This man who'd chased her brother's failing heart across the city with the best surgeon in the country. And she said quietly, "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did," Adrian said. "Why?" And Adrian, who had given her a whole speech about debt the night before, found that he had a simpler answer now. "Because last night you asked me what the price was," he said, "for helping Noah. You were so sure there was a catch. And I keep thinking about that, about a person who's so used to the world taking from her that she can't even understand a gift." He looked at the operating room doors. "I don't want your brother to grow up like that. I don't want him to grow up thinking the world only takes. So I came. So that the first thing that happens to him when he wakes up is that a total stranger fought like hell to save him and wanted nothing back. Maybe if that's the first thing he learns, he grows up different than both of us." Claire didn't answer, but after a moment she reached over and put her hand on top of his, the way you'd comfort anyone, the way she'd comforted 1,000 frightened people in her life, and the two of them sat there in silence, a waitress and a criminal waiting on a heart. The surgery took 6 hours. At just past 5 in the afternoon, the doors opened, and Dr. Halloran came out still in his cap, pulling down his mask and his face. His tired, careful, professional face broke into a smile. "He did beautifully," the surgeon said. "The defect's repaired. His heart is strong. He's going to have a real recovery, a real childhood, a real life. He's going to run around and be a normal kid and give you gray hair for the next 50 years. He looked at Claire at the wheelchair, at the stitches, having been told the whole story on the way in. "He's going to grow up. You did it. You kept him alive long enough to get here. You did that." Claire put both hands over her mouth, and then she folded forward in the wheelchair and sobbed deep, racking, full-bodied sobs, the sound of 2 years of terror finally being allowed to leave her body, and Mrs. Alvarez was holding her from one side and Lily from the other, and Maya had turned away to wipe her own eyes, and Adrian Voss stood a little apart from all of it, watching a family that wasn't his, celebrate a life he'd helped save, and feeling something in his chest he had no word for, because he'd never felt it before. It wasn't the feeling of buying something. He knew that feeling. This wasn't it. It was the feeling of having done something that mattered and having it stay clean. The thing Claire had refused to sell. The thing he'd spent 20 years too afraid to feel. Noah woke up 2 hours later, groggy and small and confused, and the first face he saw was his sister's wheeled up beside his bed, and he croaked out, "Claire!" in a voice like sandpaper, and Claire took his little hand and pressed it to her face and said, "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. You're okay. You're all fixed up. I'm here." And Noah, 8 years old, not understanding any of it, seeing only that his sister was crying, did the thing that broke every heart in that room. He reached up with his other hand and patted her face and said, "Don't cry, Claire. Don't be afraid. I'm here." The exact words she'd said to Lily, the exact words she'd said to him 1,000 times on his bad nights. He'd learned them from her. He'd given them back to her. And Adrian Voss, standing in the doorway of a hospital room in a coat worth more than everything that little boy owned, had to leave the room because the most dangerous man in the city could not let anyone see him cry, and he was about to, and he barely made it into the hallway before it happened. Maya found him there a few minutes later, his back against the wall, his face wet, and she didn't say anything about it. She just stood beside him. "The accounting you asked for," she said quietly after a while. "The list. Every deal like the block by the water. I started pulling it together." She hesitated. "Adrian, it's long. It's really long. 20 years. There are a lot of names on it. A lot of families. If you do what you said, if you try to make it right with every single one of them, it's going to take the rest of your life. And it's going to cost you almost everything. The empire won't survive it. You understand that. You start paying these debts, really paying them, and you won't be Adrian Voss anymore. Not the way anyone knows him. Adrian wiped his face and looked back through the doorway where a little boy who'd nearly died that morning was patting his sister's cheek and telling her not to be afraid. "Good," Adrian said. "Good. I don't want to be Adrian Voss anymore," he said. "Not the way anyone knows him. That man made Marcus Reed. That man made 100 Marcus Reeds. That man walked past that boy's whole life without ever once seeing it." He straightened up off the wall. "I'd rather spend the rest of my life paying debts than spend one more day being the thing that made them. Start the list, all of it, every name. We're going to find every single family, Maya, and we're going to do for them what we did for Noah today, one at a time for as long as it takes." Maya looked at him for a long moment, and then slowly she nodded, and Adrian understood that she was with him, that she'd follow him out of the empire the same way she'd followed him into it, and that was its own kind of gift he hadn't earned either. But there was one more thing, one thing he hadn't told anyone, one thing that had been sitting in his chest since the basement, since Marcus Reed had laughed at him and said, "You really don't know." Because the block by the water hadn't been the first. It had been 4 years ago, but it hadn't been the first, and it wasn't even the worst, and there was a name near the very top of that list of families Adrian had ruined that he already knew was on it without having to look. A name from the very beginning. From before the empire was even an empire. From the very first terrible thing Adrian Voss had ever done to make himself untouchable. And that name was going to come for him too eventually, the way Marcus had. Adrian knew it the way you know a storm is coming from the color of the sky. Somewhere out there was the first family he destroyed, the one that had made him what he was, and someday someone from it was going to walk back into his life. He just didn't know yet that it would be sooner than he thought. Or that when it came, it would cost him the one thing he'd just discovered he couldn't live without. The storm came 6 weeks later, and it came wearing a face Adrian would have known anywhere. Noah had gone home by then. Not to the small apartment in Queens, but to a better one closer to good doctors, closer to the school. Claire had always wanted for him, paid for through an arrangement she had finally grudgingly stopped fighting. She still refused most of it. She still insisted on working, though not as a waitress anymore. Adrian had made her the director of the foundation. He'd started the one that found families like Marcus Reed's and families like her own, and did for them what he'd done for Noah. She'd taken that job not as charity, but as a fight, because Claire Bennett had never in her life known how to do anything except fight for people, and now she had a whole city full of them to fight for. 6 weeks of watching Noah get stronger. 6 weeks of watching a little boy who'd spent his whole life sick learn what it felt like to run without his heart betraying him. 6 weeks of Adrian showing up at that apartment more often than he could explain, sitting on the floor building things out of blocks, with a boy who had decided with the fearless generosity of children that this quiet, serious man was his friend. 6 weeks of Adrian dismantling his empire piece by piece, name by name, family by family. Maya at his side, the whole rotten structure coming down slower than he'd built it, but coming down all the same. And in all those 6 weeks, Adrian had not told Claire about the name at the top of the list. He'd found it, of course, the very first week. It had been exactly where he knew it would be, the way you know where an old wound is, even in the dark. The first family he'd ever destroyed. Before the money, before the name, people whispered when he'd been young and hungry and desperate and had made one choice that turned him into everything he'd spent his life becoming. He'd found the name and he'd stared at it and he'd closed the file and he'd told himself he'd handle that one last when he was stronger, when he was ready. He was never going to be ready. That was the thing about the debts you owe. You're never ready. The man who walked into the foundation's office that afternoon was Adrian's age-gray at the temples, ordinary-looking in every way, except for his eyes, which had the same thing in them that Marcus Reed's had carried into that restaurant. Not madness, grief that had calcified into purpose. He asked for Claire Bennett by name, said he wanted to discuss a donation, and Claire, who never turned away anyone who might help the families she fought for, brought him a cup of coffee and sat down across from him and asked how she could help. She didn't know. That was the thing Adrian would never forgive himself for. She didn't know that the man across the desk had spent 25 years hating the name Voss, or that he'd tracked Adrian's recent strange behavior, the empire coming apart, the foundation, the sudden decency, and had come to understand that the man who'd ruined his family had found something he loved, had found a woman and a little boy who mattered to him, and had decided the way broken people decide that the only justice left was to take from Adrian exactly what Adrian had taken from him. The man's name was Daniel Kane, and 25 years ago when Adrian was young and desperate and building his first foothold, Adrian had set a chain of events in motion that ended with Daniel Kane's wife and daughter dead in a car that shouldn't have failed the way it failed. It was Adrian's first, his original sin, the one that taught him that he could do terrible things and survive them, and that lesson had built everything else. Daniel had come to make Adrian feel it. He reached into his coat, and Claire Bennett, who had learned to read danger before it arrived, who had spent her whole life sharpening that instinct down to the bone, saw the change in the man's eyes half a second before his hand moved, and she did the only thing she had ever known how to do. She got in the way. Adrian was in the hallway. He heard the commotion, heard Claire's voice go sharp and loud, heard a sound he'd heard once before in a restaurant 6 weeks ago, and he came through the door running, and what he saw stopped his heart in his chest. Claire was on the floor, again, hurt, again, because she'd put herself between a desperate man and someone he'd come to kill. Again. Except this time the someone was Adrian, and Claire hadn't hesitated for a fraction of a second, and Daniel Kane was standing over her with a weapon in his shaking hand, and horror dawning on his face, because he'd come to kill Adrian Voss, and instead he'd hurt the woman who ran the foundation, the woman who'd given him coffee, the woman who'd asked how she could help. "Claire," Adrian said, and his voice came out of him in a way it never had. He crossed the room and dropped to his knees beside her, exactly as he had on the marble floor of that restaurant. Except this time it was so much worse, because this time he knew her. This time she was the whole reason he'd become someone worth saving. "No, no, no, no! Claire, look at me!" She was conscious. Pale, hurt, but conscious. And her eyes found his, and even now, even bleeding, the first thing she said wasn't about herself. "Noah," she gasped. "Is Noah? Is he here? Is he safe?" "Noah's at school. He's safe. He's fine," Adrian said. "Stay with me. Don't you dare, Maya. Maya, get an ambulance." He pressed his hands to the wound the way he'd watched Maya's people do 6 weeks ago, and he looked up at Daniel Kane standing frozen above them, and the two men stared at each other, and Adrian saw the exact moment Daniel recognized what he'd done. "She got in the way," Daniel whispered. The weapon was hanging loose in his hand now. She wasn't supposed to—" "I know who you are," Adrian said. His hands were red with Claire's blood, and his voice was terrible and quiet. "Daniel Kane, your wife, your daughter, 25 years ago. I know. I found your name 6 weeks ago, and I was too much of a coward to come to you first. This is my fault. All of it. Hers too. You came for me, and you're right to. But her—" His voice cracked. "She never did anything. She's the best person either of us will ever meet, and she just took what you meant for me because that's who she is. So you look at her. You look at what almost happened. Because that's what you were about to become. That's what I made you into, the same as I made myself. A man who kills someone innocent to feel even." Daniel Kane looked down at Claire, at the blood, at the woman who'd given him coffee. And the weapon fell from his hand and clattered to the floor, and Daniel Kane sank down to his knees, this man who'd carried 25 years of hate all the way to this room, and he began to make a sound that Adrian recognized because he'd heard it in a basement 6 weeks ago from another broken man. The sound of hate finally cracking open to show the grief underneath it. The sound of a person realizing they'd almost become the thing that ruined them. "I'm sorry," Daniel said to Claire, to no one, to a wife and a daughter 25 years gone. Oh God, I'm sorry. What did I do? What did I almost do?" "Stay down," Maya said, coming through the door, and she kicked the weapon away, and she had Daniel secured in seconds, but Daniel wasn't fighting. Daniel had stopped fighting the moment the woman who'd asked how she could help hit the floor. The ambulance came in 4 minutes. It felt like 400 years. Claire held on to Adrian's hand the whole time, and she kept trying to talk, and he kept telling her to save her strength, and she wouldn't because Claire Bennett had never once in her life saved her strength for herself. "Adrian," she said, listen to me. If I don't, you will. Don't. If I don't," she pushed on fierce even now. "Noah, you take care of Noah. Promise me, not with money. You raise him, you and Lily. You show him the world isn't only what it did to you. Promise me." "You're going to raise him yourself," Adrian said, and there were tears running down the face of the most feared man in the city, and he didn't care who saw. "Because you're going to live. You hear me? You saved my sister. You saved that boy. You saved me. You don't even know what you did to me. Claire, you turned something back on that I'd had switched off for 20 years, and I am not going to let the first person who ever looked at me and expected nothing die on a floor because of what I did before I ever met you. So you fight. You fight the way you make everybody else fight. You stay." And Claire Bennett, looking up at him, managed something that was almost a smile. "Bossy," she whispered, "for a guy who owes me his whole self." Then her eyes closed, and the paramedics lifted her, and Adrian ran alongside the gurney, holding her hand, until they made him let go at the ambulance doors. And then he stood in the street and watched them take her away, exactly as he'd watched them take her away 6 weeks before. And he made the same bargain with the same God in the same words. "Take it from me. Take anything. Not her. Not her." Claire went into surgery for the second time in 6 weeks, and Adrian sat in a waiting room for the second time in 6 weeks, except this time Lily was beside him from the start. And this time, an 8-year-old boy sat on his other side because they'd had to bring Noah from school and tell him his sister was hurt. And Noah, who had learned everything he knew about being brave from Claire, sat very straight and very still and held Adrian's hand and said, "She's going to be okay. Claire always gets back up. She always does." "I know she does," Adrian said, and prayed to God the boy was right. The hours crawled. And in those hours, Adrian did the thing he'd been avoiding for 6 weeks, the thing that had almost cost Claire her life. He made a call. He had Daniel Kane brought not to a basement, not to be disappeared, but to a room where Adrian could sit across from him the way he'd sat across from Marcus. And this time, Adrian didn't wait to be asked why. "I killed your family," Adrian said. 25 years ago. Your wife, your daughter. It wasn't an accident. It was me. I was young, and I was desperate, and I did something unforgivable, and I've spent 25 years pretending I didn't. You've spent 25 years knowing. So there's no lie left between us. I did it. It's true. And nothing I do now undoes it." Daniel Kane, cuffed, hollow-eyed, stared at the man he'd hated for a quarter century. "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel said. "You could bury it. You could bury me. That's what you do." "That's what I did," Adrian said. "It's not what I do anymore. 6 weeks ago, a woman took a knife for my sister and asked for nothing, and it broke something open in me that had been closed my whole adult life. And I started trying to find every person I'd ever hurt and make it right, and you were at the top of the list, and I was too much of a coward to come to you first. And because I was a coward, you walked into that office today, and that same woman took a bullet meant for me." Adrian's jaw was tight. "So this is me finally not being a coward. It's 25 years too late, and it's worth nothing to your wife, and it's worth nothing to your daughter. But it's the truth, and you've earned the truth, and I'm done letting you carry a lie so I don't have to feel it." Daniel was quiet for a long time. "What happens to me now?" he finally said. "You'll be arrested," Adrian said. "For today. What you did today is real, and there's no making it disappear, and I wouldn't if I could. You'll go to prison." He paused. "But you're going to be alive to do it. And there's going to be a defense fund, and there's going to be money for you when you come out, the same as there is for Marcus Reed, the same as there is for every family on my list. Not to buy your silence. Tell the world what I did to your wife and daughter. I hope you do. It's true, and it should be known, and I'll confirm every word of it. But you're not going to come out into nothing, because your family came out into nothing, and I did that, and it stops now. Daniel Kane put his cuffed hands over his face, and for the second time in 6 weeks, Adrian sat in a room and watched a man he'd broken finally set down the weight of hating him. And it did not make Adrian feel absolved, because there is no absolution for what he'd done, and he knew it, and he had stopped looking for it. He'd stopped looking for absolution the day he watched a poor waitress refuse his money to keep the one clean thing she had. He was just trying now one impossible debt at a time to leave the world a little less broken than the way he'd found it. That was all. That was the whole of it. That was enough. At 9 that night, the surgeon came out, and Adrian and Lily and a little boy named Noah, who believed with his whole repaired heart that his sister always got back up, rose to their feet. "She's going to be okay," the surgeon said. Noah cheered, actually cheered an 8-year-old's whoop of pure joy, and threw his arms around Adrian's waist, and Adrian caught him and held him. This child who'd nearly died and lived, whose sister had nearly died twice and lived, and Adrian Voss held on to that little boy and let himself for one moment simply be grateful, without deserving it, without paying for it, without a price. Claire recovered slower this time, but she recovered. And when she was strong enough, Adrian sat beside her bed, the way he had the first night, lower than her, looking up, and he told her everything. About Daniel Kane, about the wife and the daughter 25 years ago, about the name at the top of the list that he'd been too much of a coward to face, and how that cowardice had nearly gotten her killed. He told her the worst thing he'd ever done, the thing that had made him a monster, and he did it because he'd learned from her that the only clean thing a person can offer is the truth offered freely, with nothing asked in return. Claire listened to all of it, and when he was done, when he'd laid out the whole ugly sum of what he was, he waited for the thing he'd always waited for, which was for the other person to finally see him clearly and turn away. She didn't turn away. "That was 25 years ago," Claire said quietly. "And you've spent 6 weeks becoming someone who would never do it. I've watched you. I've watched you sit on the floor with my brother. I've watched you find families nobody else would help. I've watched you tell the truth when a lie would have been easier and safer, over and over." She reached out and took his hand. "The man who killed Daniel Kane's family is real. I won't pretend he's not. But he's not the man holding my hand right now. You became someone else. People can do that. It's the hardest thing in the world, and almost nobody does it but you did. I'm not going to punish the person you became for what the person you were did. That's not justice. That's just cruelty with a nicer name." Adrian couldn't speak. "But Adrian," Claire said, and her voice got firmer, "Noah cannot grow up around that other man's world, the empire, the fear, whatever's left of it. I let you help us, and I'm grateful, more grateful than I know how to say. But I will not raise my brother in a world where people walk into offices with weapons because of who you used to be, so you finish it. All of it. Every last piece of what you built. You come all the way out, or Noah and I love you from a distance, but we don't live inside it. Those are the only 2 ways this goes." And Adrian Voss, who had spent his whole life being told what people wanted from him, and never once being told the truth, looked at the one person who had only ever told him the truth, and he made the easiest hard decision of his life. "It's already almost gone," he said. "Give me a year. It'll all be gone. Every piece. And whatever's left, I'll pour into the foundation, into the families, into the boy. There won't be an empire for anyone to come after. There'll just be me. A man who used to be Adrian Voss, spending the rest of his life trying to be worth what you did for me on a restaurant floor." He held her hand tighter. "I can't promise you I'll ever be a good man, Claire. I've done too much. But I can promise you I'll spend every day trying, and I can promise you your brother will never know the man I was, only the one I'm becoming." Claire smiled at him, then fully the first real smile he'd seen on her face in all these weeks. "That's enough," she said. "That's all anybody can promise. That's enough." He kept the promise. It took a year, and it cost him almost everything, exactly as Maya had warned, and Adrian gave it up piece by piece without a single regret, because every piece he set down made him lighter, and every family the foundation found and helped made the ledger a little less impossible. And though he knew he could never balance it, never come close, he had stopped needing to. He'd learned that from Claire, too. You don't help people to balance a ledger. You help them because they need help. That was the whole of it. That was the only reason there had ever been. A year later, on a clear afternoon, they all stood together in Central Park. Noah was 10 now, and he was running. Just running for no reason, the way healthy children run, with a heart that would carry him all the way into old age, laughing at something Lily had said, his sneakers slapping the path. Claire watched him run with an expression on her face that Adrian had come to live for, the expression of a woman who had spent 8 years terrified and was finally at long last not afraid. Maya was there. Mrs. Alvarez was there. Even Marcus Reed was there, out on parole, working for the foundation now, finding other broken people before their grief turned into something that walked into a restaurant with a blade. He and Adrian didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Some debts you don't pay with words. And Adrian Voss stood beside Claire Bennett and watched a little boy run through the sunlight, and he understood finally and completely the thing she'd been trying to teach him since the night she whispered 4 words to a frightened girl on a marble floor. He'd spent his whole life believing power was the ability to make people afraid, to take, to destroy, to be untouchable. He'd built an empire on it, and it had made him the most feared man in the city, and it had nearly gotten his sister killed, and it had produced 100 broken men who dreamed of doing to him what he'd done to them. And a waitress with holes in her shoes had shown him what power actually was. Power was a woman with nothing left to give who gave everything anyway. Power was refusing a fortune because your integrity was worth more than your comfort. Power was holding a frightened stranger and saying, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Power was the strength to destroy someone and the choice not to. Power was becoming at 41 years old with a monstrous history and no right to expect it someone new. The person with the least power in that restaurant had turned out to carry the most. She always had. She just hadn't known it because nobody had ever told her, because the world had spent her whole life telling her she was invisible. She wasn't invisible anymore. Claire looked over at him and saw something on his face and asked, "What are you thinking?" Adrian watched Noah run into Lily's arms, the two of them collapsing into the grass, laughing, a boy who'd nearly died 3 times, and lived a girl who'd nearly died, and lived in a park full of ordinary afternoon light. "I'm thinking you saved my life," Adrian said. "That night in the restaurant. Everyone thinks you saved Lily's, and you did, but you saved mine too. You just did it slower." Claire was quiet a moment. Then she reached over and took his hand the way she'd taken it outside an operating room a year and a half ago, the way she took the hand of anyone who needed comforting, because that was simply who she was and had always been. "You're safe now, too," she said softly, the same words. The ones she'd said to him at the very end the first time when she'd barely known him. And this time, for the first time in his entire life, Adrian Voss believed it completely. Because he had finally learned the truth that Claire Bennett had known all along, the truth she'd carried in her worn-out shoes, and her tired hands, and her stubborn, unbreakable, unbuyable heart. A person's worth is never measured by their money, their status, or how many people fear them. It is measured by one thing only: the thing you give when no one is watching, and no one expects anything back, and there is nothing at all to gain. Claire had given that freely to a stranger on the worst night of her life, and it had rippled outward and saved a sister, saved a brother, saved a killer from becoming a murderer, and saved the soul of the most dangerous man in the city. One act of kindness from one ordinary person changed everything. It always does. Part 6. 3 years after the afternoon in Central Park, the foundation had a name that people said out loud with respect instead of fear. And that was the strangest part for Adrian, that a name could carry the opposite of what it once carried and still be his. They called it the Bennett House. Claire had fought him on it, of course, because Claire fought him on everything that pointed a light in her direction. She'd wanted it named after nobody, or after all the families, or after Noah's surgeon, or after literally any human being other than herself. But Adrian had won that one, the only argument he ever truly won against her, and he'd won it with a single sentence. "It started the night you got in the way," he'd said. "So it carries your name. That's not a debt, Claire. That's just the truth, and you taught me to tell the truth." She'd gone quiet at that, the way she did when he used her own lessons against her, and she'd let it stand. The Bennett house had grown from one office into a building, and then into 3 buildings, and then into something that stretched across the whole city and reached into other cities too. It found families the way Claire had once needed to be found and never was. a child with a sick heart and a parent drowning in bills, a widow about to lose a home to a developer who didn't care whose life sat in the middle of what he wanted, a man out of prison with nothing waiting for him but the same emptiness that had put him there. The foundation found them before the world finished breaking them, and it did for them what Adrian had done for Noah on the worst morning of Claire's life, and it asked them for nothing, because Claire had built the whole thing on the one principle she'd carried her entire life. You help people because they need help. There is no other reason, and there was never meant to be. Noah was 13 now. That was the number that stopped Adrian sometimes in the middle of an ordinary day. 13. A boy who the doctors had once said would not see 10 without a surgery his sister couldn't afford. And now he was 13 and he was tall, and his voice had started doing the thing where it cracked in the middle of sentences and mortified him, and he played basketball badly and passionately, and he argued about bedtimes, and he had a heart that a surgeon in a public hospital had rebuilt in 6 hours on the same day it was supposed to stop forever. 13. Every year past 10 was a year that a waitress's stubbornness and a criminal's money and a surgeon's hands had stolen back from death, and Adrian never once stopped noticing them. Noah called him Adrian mostly. Sometimes when he forgot to be a teenager for a second, when he was scared or sick or half asleep, he called him something else. And Adrian never told him he'd heard it, because he was afraid if he mentioned it, the boy would get embarrassed and stop. The something else was Dad. It had started small a year or so back, an accident, a slip. Noah had woken up from a nightmare still half in it and padded down the hall, and Adrian had been up because Adrian was always up. Some habits of a dangerous life never fully die, and the boy had stood in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, and said, "Dad, I can't sleep." And then his eyes had come fully open and he'd frozen horrified, waiting to be corrected. Adrian hadn't corrected him. Adrian had just said, "Come here then," and made room, and neither of them ever spoke of it, and it happened more and more after that, always in the unguarded hours, always never mentioned in the light. Adrian had never expected to be anyone's father. He'd spent his life certain that whatever was in him was the kind of thing that shouldn't be passed to a child, that his particular darkness ended with him and good riddance. And instead, a sick little boy had decided with no permission from anyone that this quiet, serious man was his, and Adrian had discovered that being chosen by a child is a thing you cannot buy, cannot earn, cannot deserve, and cannot ever, once it's happened, do without. Claire saw it. Of course Claire saw it. Claire saw everything. He said it again last night, she told Adrian one morning, watching Noah shovel cereal into his mouth at the kitchen counter and read something on his phone at the same time. "The D word. I heard him through the wall." "He was half asleep," Adrian said. "He doesn't mean it awake." "He means it more asleep than awake," Claire said. "That's when people mean things the most." She looked at him sideways. "You should let him say it awake, Adrian. You keep pretending you don't hear it because you think you don't deserve it. But it's not about what you deserve. It's about what he needs. And he needs a father. He's needed one his whole life. And he picked you, God help him, so you don't get to turn it down just because you've got a low opinion of yourself." That was the other thing that had happened in 3 years, slowly, without either of them quite naming it. Adrian and Claire. It wasn't a thing that had a beginning anyone could point to. There'd been no moment, no confession, no dramatic scene of the kind that Claire would have found unbearable and Adrian would have distrusted. It had just grown the way the foundation had grown, the way the boy had grown, quietly and steadily, and against all odds, out of 1,000 ordinary days of building something together. Coffee gone cold on a desk at midnight while they argued over which family to help first. Adrian on the floor with Noah and a science project the night before it was due. Claire falling asleep on the office couch, and Adrian putting his coat over her and turning off the lights. A partnership that had become a friendship that had become, at some point, neither of them had marked something with no other name for it than the one neither of them said out loud. They had never once talked about it. That was very them. Two people who had learned the hard way that saying a thing out loud could make the world take it away, and so they'd both decided without discussing it that they would simply have it and not name it and never risk it by looking at it directly. Lily thought this was insane. Lily said so loudly and often, "You two are the most emotionally repressed people I have ever met in my life," Lily announced one evening, 22 now, and finished with college and running the medical side of the foundation with a fierceness that surprised everyone except Adrian, who had always known his sister was stronger than the world had let her be. "You raise a kid together. You built an entire empire of good together. You look at each other like you're in a 19th century novel, and neither of you will say a single word about it. It's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for you. Everyone is embarrassed for you. Maya has a bet running." "Maya does not have a bet running," Adrian said. "Maya absolutely has a bet running," Lily said. "The whole office has a bet running. There's a spreadsheet." There was, in fact, a spreadsheet. Adrian found out about it later and pretended to be furious and was secretly, quietly, absurdly touched that a building full of people cared enough about two damaged human beings to bet on their happiness. But the thing that finally moved it, the thing that pushed two people who'd been standing at the edge of something for 3 years to finally step into it, wasn't Lily's needling or Maya's spreadsheet or any of the gentle pressure of the people who loved them. It was Noah. Noah, 13 years old, cornered Adrian in the kitchen one Sunday with the terrible directness of a teenager who has decided something and cannot understand why the adults are being so slow about it. "Are you and Claire going to get married or what?" Noah said. Adrian, who had negotiated with killers and buried enemies and dismantled a criminal empire without his pulse changing, nearly dropped a coffee cup. He started. "That's not Noah, that's complicated." "It's not complicated," Noah said with the magnificent certainty of youth. "You love her. She loves you. You already live here, basically. You already do everything a dad does. I already call you dad when I forget to be weird about it, which you know, because I know you hear me because you always turn off my light after." He crossed his arms. "The only thing that's missing is that you're both too scared to say it. And Claire taught me that when something scares you, that usually means it matters. And the scared feeling is just proof it's important and you do it anyway. She taught me that. So why doesn't she do it?" Adrian stared at the boy, at this 13-year-old who had just handed him back verbatim the philosophy of the woman who'd built both of them. "She taught you that," Adrian said quietly. "She teaches me everything," Noah said like it was obvious. "She's the smartest person in the world. She's just dumb about this one thing, and so are you." He picked up his basketball and headed for the door, and then he stopped, and he said the thing that finished it, the thing that broke the last of Adrian's 20 years of armor into pieces too small to ever put back together. "I almost died, you know, like a bunch of times. And Claire almost died, twice, because people are always getting in the way to save each other in this family." He said it so casually, this boy who'd lived his whole short life inside the shadow of death and come out the other side. "And I keep thinking, what if one of you did die before you ever even said it? You'd have wasted the whole thing being scared. And that would be the stupidest, saddest thing I can think of. So don't. Okay, just don't be scared. Life's too short. I would know." And then he went outside to shoot baskets, leaving Adrian standing in the kitchen holding a coffee cup, undone by a 13-year-old. Adrian found Claire that evening in the office at the Bennett house, alone working late the way she always did, the way she probably always would, because some part of Claire Bennett would never fully believe there wasn't a family out there right now who needed her and couldn't wait until morning. She looked up when he came in. She'd known his footsteps for years now. She smiled the tired smile she saved for him, the one nobody else got. "You should be home," she said. "It's late." "So should you." "There's a family in the Bronx. The intake came in an hour ago. Little girl kidney thing, the insurance is fighting it. I was just—" She gestured at the papers. "I know it can wait till morning. I know. I just can't ever quite make myself believe it can." Adrian sat down across from her lower, looking up the way he'd sat the very first night in a hospital room when she was a stranger who'd saved his sister and refused his money. "Noah talked to me today," he said. Claire raised an eyebrow. "Uh-oh. What did he do?" "Nothing. He didn't do anything." Adrian turned a pen over in his hands, this man who was never nervous. "He asked me a question, and he said some things you taught him, apparently, about being scared and about how scared usually means important and about how you do the thing anyway." Claire went very still. She'd gone still like that before. He'd learned to recognize it. It was the stillness of a woman who saw danger coming Except this wasn't danger. This was the opposite of danger. And he watched her realize it wasn't danger, and he watched her not know what to do with that.
"Claire," Adrian said, "I've owed you a debt since the night I met you. You know that. I've spent 5 years trying to pay it, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying, and I'll never get close, and I've made my peace with that. But there's one thing I've never said to you in 5 years, because I was afraid that saying it out loud would make the world take it away. You taught me that fear. You didn't mean to. But it's the one lesson of yours I learned wrong, and I've been living inside it wrong for years, and a 13-year-old had to point it out to me, which is humiliating, and I don't care." Claire's eyes had gone bright. She didn't say anything. For once in her life, Claire Bennett had nothing to say. "I love you," Adrian said. Simple. Plain. No empire in it, no leverage, no calculation. The words of a man who'd finally learned to give something and want nothing back. "I have loved you since you told me no in a hospital bed, since you refused the only thing I knew how to give and kept the one clean thing you had. You taught me what a person is worth, and then you spent 5 years being the proof of it, right in front of me every single day. And I've been too scared to say it because I thought a man like me didn't get to have this. But Noah's right. Being scared just means it matters. And nothing has ever mattered to me more than you, so I'm saying it out loud, in the light. And I'm not taking it back, and I'm not letting you deflect it. And you don't have to say anything at all if you're not ready, but you're going to hear it because you've spent your whole life making sure everyone else got what they needed and never once letting anyone give you what you need. And what you need, Claire Bennett, is to be told by someone who means it more than he's ever meant anything, that you are loved. Completely. Exactly as you are, with nothing asked in return." The office was very quiet. Claire Bennett, who had held a frightened stranger on a marble floor, who had run toward 2 different weapons in 5 years, who had raised a dying child into a healthy boy through sheer refusal to give up, who had never once in her adult life allowed herself to be caught by anyone, Claire put her face in her hands and cried. And Adrian came around the desk and knelt down in front of her, and he took her hands away from her face gently, the way she'd taken a photograph from his fingers once, and he held them and he waited. "I'm not good at this," Claire whispered. "You know I'm not good at this. I don't know how to nobody ever, Adrian. I've spent my whole life being the one who takes care of people. I don't know how to be the one who gets taken care of. I don't know how to let someone love me. I don't even know if I know how." "Then we'll figure it out," Adrian said. Slowly, the way we figured out everything else. "I'm a very patient man, Claire. I built an empire. I can wait for you to learn how to be loved for as long as it takes." "That's the thing, though," Claire said, and now she was almost laughing through the tears, that broken, exhausted, relieved laugh he'd first heard when a surgeon told her Noah would live. "It's not going to take long. That's what scares me. Because I already love you. I've loved you for years. I just did the same thing you did. I decided I didn't get to have it. I decided people like me don't get the fairy tale. We just build the fairy tale for other people and go home alone and call it enough." She squeezed his hands. "But I don't want to go home alone anymore, Adrian. I'm so tired of being brave by myself. I've been brave by myself my whole life. I want to be brave with someone." "You already are," Adrian said. "You have been for 5 years. We just never said it." "Then say it again," Claire whispered. "The thing you said. Say it one more time so I know it's real." "I love you," Adrian said. "Completely. Exactly as you are, with nothing asked in return." And Claire Bennett at last let herself be caught. They were married in the spring in Central Park, in the same green place where they'd once watched a healthy boy run through the sunlight. It was small. Claire wouldn't have anything else, and Adrian, who could have bought a cathedral, wanted exactly what she wanted, which was the smallest number of the most important people standing in the open air. Lily was there, of course, weeping openly and happily, and telling anyone who'd listen that she'd called it years ago, that the spreadsheet had proven her right, that emotionally repressed people could in fact eventually get their act together if you gave them half a decade and a persistent teenager. Maya was there, and Maya, who never cried, cried, and pretended it was allergies, and everyone let her. Mrs. Alvarez was there, older now, moving slower, but they're having prayed this family into existence one desperate night at a time. Dr. Halloran was there, the surgeon, whose hands had made the whole thing possible, invited, because Claire never forgot a debt any more than Adrian did. And Marcus Reed was there. That was the one that made people look twice the guest at the edge of the gathering, the man who had once walked into a restaurant to commit a murder and had instead become one of the Foundation's most relentless workers, finding broken people before their grief calcified, doing the exact opposite of the thing he'd once done. He and Adrian still didn't talk much, but Marcus had come in a suit that didn't quite fit, and when Adrian had seen him arrive, the two men had looked at each other across the grass, and something had passed between them that no words could have carried. Two men who had ruined and been ruined, standing in the sunlight at a wedding alive, changed, forgiven in the only way that mattered, which was not by each other, but by their own refusal to remain the things they'd been. And Noah walked Claire down the aisle. He'd insisted on it. 13 years old in his first real suit, so proud he could barely contain it. This boy who'd spent his whole life being walked places by his sister, who'd been carried and protected and fought for by her since before he could remember. He got to give her away. He got to be the one who delivered her finally into a life where someone else would carry some of the weight she'd carried alone for so long. And when they reached the front before he handed her to Adrian, Noah did something no one had planned. He stopped. He turned to his sister. And in front of everyone, this teenager who was normally too cool for any of it, he said the thing that made the entire gathering dissolve. "You always told me not to be afraid," Noah said, his voice cracking, and not from puberty this time. "My whole life. Every time I was sick, every time I was scared, every time I thought my heart was going to quit, you'd hold my hand and you'd say, 'Don't be afraid, I'm here.'" He looked at Claire, his sister, his whole world, the woman who'd become his mother in every way that counted. "So I want to say it back, just once, for all the times." He took her hands. "Don't be afraid, Claire. I'm here. And now Adrian's here, and Lily and Maya and everybody. You don't have to hold everyone up by yourself anymore. We've got you now. So don't be afraid. Okay, we're all here." Claire couldn't speak. She just pulled her little brother, who wasn't little anymore, who was nearly as tall as she was, who was alive, 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 into her arms, and held him the way she'd held him on 1,000 frightening nights. Except this time, she was the one shaking, and he was the one steady, and the whole circle of people who loved them stood in the spring sunlight and wept. Then Noah put his sister's hand in Adrian's, and stepped back and grinned and said, "Okay, now you can do the rest of it." And everyone laughed through their tears, and the ceremony went on. They didn't say traditional vows. Neither of them was traditional about anything. When it came time, Claire looked at Adrian and said the truest thing she knew. "The night I met you, I thought you were the most powerful man in the room," she said. "Everyone did, and I was wrong. You weren't the most powerful. You were the most afraid. You just built a wall around it so high nobody could see. And I spent 5 years watching you take that wall down brick by brick and become someone brave enough to be gentle, which is the hardest kind of brave there is." She held his hands. "I don't care what you did before I knew you. I've told you that. I care what you've done every day since. And what you've done every day since is choose to be good when being cruel would have been easier over and over for 5 years, when nobody was making you, when nobody would have stopped you, when there was nothing in it for you at all. That's the only measure of a person that's ever mattered to me. What you give when nobody's watching and nothing's owed. And you've given more than any man I've ever known. So yes, yes to all of it. Yes to the rest of our lives." And Adrian, who had once believed everything in the world had a price, looked at the one thing he'd found that couldn't be bought and made his vow. "I spent 20 years taking," he said. "I took from everyone. I took whatever I wanted, and I told myself it was strength. And then a waitress with holes in her shoes refused to let me give her anything because she understood something I'd never learned, which is that the only things worth having are the ones you can't put a price on." He looked at her, this woman who'd changed everything standing in the sun. "You saved my sister's life. You saved Noah's. You saved that broken man standing at the back of this crowd from becoming a murderer, and you saved a man named Daniel Kane the same way, and you saved 100 families you'll never even meet through the work you built. But the life you saved that I can never repay is mine. You reached into a dead man's chest and you turned the heart back on. And I have spent every day since trying to be worth it, and I'll spend every day left trying to be worth it, and I know I never fully will, and I've made my peace with that too." And he raised her hands and pressed them to his chest over the heart she'd restarted. "So this is my vow. I will spend the rest of my life giving the way you taught me, without asking, without a price. To you, to Noah, to every family that walks through the door of a house that carries your name. And I will never, as long as I live, let you be brave by yourself again. You'll be brave with me now. That's the whole promise. That's everything I have. It's yours." The city they'd both been broken by went on around them the way cities do, indifferent and enormous and full of 10 million other stories. But in one green corner of it on one spring afternoon, a waitress and the man they used to whisper about stood in the sunlight and promised each other the rest of their lives, surrounded by the living proof of what one act of unbought kindness could do when you let it ripple outward and never once tried to charge for it. Years later, when Noah was grown, when he was a doctor himself, a cardiac surgeon, because of course he was, because how could he have become anything else? People would sometimes ask him about the foundation, about the Bennett house, about the strange and beautiful family that ran it. They'd ask how it all started. And Noah would tell them the truth, the same truth every time, the truth that had shaped his entire life. "It started because my sister got in the way," he'd say. "There was a girl about to be hurt in a restaurant a long time ago, and everyone in the room ran away from the danger, except my sister. She ran toward it. She was nobody. She had nothing. She had every reason in the world to run like everyone else. And she didn't. She got in the way, and she took the hit, and she said 4 words to a frightened stranger. Noah would smile, then the same gap-toothed smile from a bent photograph grown up now, but unchanged. She said, 'Don't be afraid, I'm here.' And those 4 words changed everything. They saved a girl, and a criminal, and a killer, and a boy with a broken heart, and a man everyone was scared of, and then thousands of people none of us ever met." He'd let that sit. "My sister taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by their money, or their power, or how many people fear them. It's measured by one thing: what you're willing to give when no one expects anything back." She gave everything and asked for nothing on the worst night of her life for a total stranger. And then Noah would always end it the same way because it was the truest thing he knew, the thing his whole life had been built to prove. The person with the least power in the room turned out to have the most. She always did. She just needed the world to finally notice. And when it did, when one feared and broken man finally noticed, it didn't just change her life, it changed his, and it changed mine. And it kept changing lives, one family at a time, long after any of us were even in the room. That's what kindness does if you let it. It doesn't stop with the person you give it to. It never stops. It just keeps going. And it did. It never stopped.